Rogal Dorn may have slaughtered Alpharius during the Battle of Pluto, but he destroyed more than just a Primarch that day. For all intents and purposes, he ended the 20th Legion itself. And this is very apparent when we look at the current state of the Alpha Legion in Warhammer 40k, as they are not a cohesive whole, despite enduring within the borders of the Imperium for 10,000 years. In this video, we'll look at the events from Praetorian of Dorne that shed light on the situation, from the death of Alpharius at the hands of his brother Rogal Dorn, to the defiance Omegon shows Horus in the wake of the Battle of Pluto. Let's kick this one off right and get straight into the gruesome and gory scene of the death of the 20th Primarch. And suddenly Alpharius was amongst the killing tide, his attacks not following rhythm or pattern. One instant he was in the front rank, the pale spear orbiting him, its blade a blur of blood and smoke as it cut through armor and limbs. The next, he was retreating and lashing out as the Huskarls moved into the space. Then, he was pressing close, hacking and stabbing like the butchers of the World Eaters, then piercing a throat with a thrust that was as light as a breath of wind. Dorne drove into the Lernians, red spattering his face, Storm's teeth shedding blood. Then, with a suddenness that halted the shallow breath in Arcamus' throat, Alpharius' spear thrust up from the press of ranks. Its tip shimmered, silver reflection fading to mist, as Arcamus thought that the sound fled from his ears as it drove at his lord's chest. It was a beautiful strike. In all his years of war, Arcamus had never seen the like, its simplicity like a line drawn by a master artisan on a bare parchment. It was death and ruin, and silence without end. And Storm's teeth met the spear thrust, and reality shrieked. A sheet of silver sparks exploded from the tip at which the two weapons met. Alpharius and Dorne stood before each other, and it was as though the universe made space for this meeting of brothers. "I came here for you, Rogal," said Alpharius as he slid back, spear spinning. Dorne was cutting again and again, and each blow churned the air. "This is about victory. True victory." A Lernian stepped into Dorne's path. Storm's teeth cut up through the torso of the Terminator. Gut fluid and blood gushed out as the dead flesh and armor fell. The Lernians and Huskarls were a shrinking circle around the two Primarchs. "Look at this. Look at what I have done here. This is not a war you can win your way," called Alpharius. Dorne stood before him. The spear was suddenly still as his brother loomed above him, a sculpture of vengeance cast in gold. Dorne sliced downwards. Alpharius raised the spear. The weapons clashed, and suddenly the Alpha Legion Primarch was spinning close, Storm's teeth arcing past him harmlessly. "But you are blind to what you are fighting. We are both fighting for the future, Rogal." Alpharius lunged. Dorne jerked aside, blink fast. The spear tip caught his shoulder and punched through the golden armor. Dorne staggered. "I did this so that you would understand," shouted Alpharius. "So that you would see that you cannot win. I am not here to kill you, brother. I'm not here for Horus. I'm here to give you victory." Dorne was astride in front of Arcamus, blood bright and scattering as he wrenched free of Alpharius' spear. The Huskarls fell, their legs cut out beneath them as Alpharius spun wide, spear arcing low like a scythe through long grass. And now Dorne stood alone, blood running down the gold of his armor. "I know the enemy," said Alpharius. "I know your weakness and theirs. I know the truth." Dorne stepped forwards, Storm's teeth slamming down, battering into the spear blade in a blaze of light. Alpharius slipped to the side and Dorne turned the direction of his cut as it fell. But Alpharius was not where his movement should have taken him. He was behind Dorne's cut, the blade of his spear slicing down. "I can give you victory, brother," Alpharius urged him again. Dorne swayed aside and the spear blade skimmed his chest. Slivers of gold and silver feathers fell to the deck, and Alpharius was overextended. And Dorne was turning, his strength flowing into a wide lateral cut that would never land. It would never land because in that instant Arcamus saw what was about to happen. Alpharius was not overextended. He was exactly where he needed to be to turn past Dorne's blow and make another, last, perfect thrust with his spear. Arcamus felt his blood-drained body try to move faster, try to push itself across the few meters separating him from the Lord, whose life and service were the reason he did not fear. Dorne cut. Storm's teeth blurred. Alpharius swayed back, pivoting and sliding a hair's breadth past the screaming edge. Arcamus lunged to his lord's side, his sea-axe blade reaching for the spear thrust even as it unfolded. His blade caught the haft of Alpharius' spear, and the force of the connection kicked through his metal arm like the kiss of a lightning bolt. Arcamus reeled back, staggering to the deck, and the spear struck home. It rammed through Dorne's armor and into the flesh, and stopped. Dorne stood, unmoved, the spear embedded in his shoulder where he had stepped in to take the blow. His left hand was locked around the spear's haft. For an instant, the two Primarchs were an arm's reach apart, eye to eye. "Brother," Alpharius began, and Dorne hacked Storm's teeth through Alpharius' arms above the wrists. Blood and sparks fell in the flash of gunfire. The world became a slow sliding tableau of movement. Dorne's face, cold stone, marked with blood and strobing shadows as he pulled the spear from his shoulder. Alpharius, staggering, lashed out with a kick. Another cut, scything from left to right, Storm's teeth ripping armor like parchment. Red gloss sheen on indigo blue, and a demigod falling, his torso an open cave of meat and bone. The only sound, the growl of Storm's teeth and the clang as Alpharius struck the deck and began to rise, strength defying the red ruin of his body. Dorne still had the spear in one hand. But victory, Alpharius gasped. Dorne rammed the spear through his brother's chest. The tip punched through the power plant on the back of Alpharius' armor. Alpharius' mouth opened, his eyes wide. A great wash of blood poured from between his teeth. Dorne held him on the spear, the two so close that it seemed almost an embrace. The air around them was blurring like a heat haze as the blood struck the floor. A high wail was rising with a coil of wind which circled the pair. Alpharius' mouth moved, forming words. Dorne was still for a second, his eyes blank and black in the carved stone of his face. Then he pushed Alpharius away. Snakes of light writhed through the air. The Primarch of the Alpha Legion staggered, mouth still moving. Rogal Dorn brought Storm's teeth around. The blade cut down through Alpharius' skull, then tore free in a spray of blood and a detonation of light. The last planet of the solar system turned in silence. Explosions flashed. Ships glittered like snow falling through a winter night. Lives ended. They ended in small spaces with the air sucked away and the roar of gunfire pouring through passages, in the spinning blackness where the last sight given to them was the blink of explosions and the light of stars. And they ended in the heart of a moon, with the blood of a being who had been more than human, but less than a god, pooling on a floor of cold iron. Rogal Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, looked down at the corpse of his brother. Around him, the world turned. Groups of warriors appeared in fresh flashes of teleportation light. They spread through the vault as the doors crashed open and Kestros ran in and saw a sight that none would have believed. A moment that should have stopped the galaxy on its axis. A Primarch dead at the hands of his brother, within sight of the world of their creation. But the solar system turned without pause, unknowing or uncaring. And from earlier in the book, we see how Dorne is able to predict the actions of the Hydra, something that Alpharius just wouldn't expect due to his massive ego. "You will withdraw your forces from this world," said Dorne. "All of them, the agents and operatives too. I know that you used them, and I know how. I will be looking for them, and if I find any, they will not be spared." Yeah, that's pure egotism, whether it's true or not, but Alpharius does have some points to make, and doesn't flinch under Dorne's scrutiny of his legion and its methods. The moral high ground is not with Dorne, despite his unwavering belief that it is, which is easily pointed out by the Hydra. But it doesn't really seem like being considered a hypocrite is something that really bothers Rogal Dorn and the Imperial Fists. Alpha Legion forces had been sighted in the weeks that followed. A wing of armor had swept out of the ash wastes. to lend their aid to the assault on a primary surface hub of the planet's subterranean tunnel network. Scattered reports had placed warriors in variations of Alpha Legion colors in multiple battle zones. Dorne had pressed on, and hive by hive the world had continued to fall. But a core of resistant hives remained, centered around the seat of the World Prince. On the eve of a renewed assault to take the last hives, the World Prince had sent a signal surrendering. In the course of a single hour, all of his direct blood relatives had been killed. The assassin in each case had been someone trusted and close to the slain. At the end of that hour, the World Prince had given his world to the Imperium, and 401 members of the planet's ruling nobility were dead. Alpharius shrugged, the enameled scales of his armor shimmering with the gesture's movement. We did not need to kill them. That is true. We could have waited for you to grind your way through their troops, step by tedious step. The future cannot be won by a war waged in shadows. It will not be won any other way. Then that future will be dead before it can begin. Do not moralize at me, brother, spat Alpharius. And now it was his turn to flick from control to anger. Would the deaths of all those you would have killed been acceptable because they died in open battle? Yes, said Dorne. Alpharius held Dorne's gaze. I think we see the universe very differently, Rogal. No, I do not think you see the same universe at all. They looked at each other, both of their faces set, so similar for all their differences. The end matters, said Alpharius at last. Victory matters. Everything else is just delusion. With victory, we can build dreams, but without victory, they remain just dreams. Dorne shook his head and began to turn towards the doors. Arcamus moved with him. He could feel the pressure of his lord's anger arcing through the air like cold from a glacier. Dorne stopped at the doors and turned back. Your initial strikes were misdirected, he said to Alpharius. You infiltrated one hive and made it fall by systematic destabilizing of authority, but you should have waited. You could have used it as a node from which to disperse your human operatives and agents into the other hives. You managed that to a degree, but you could have forced a total collapse in their defenses across the planet, not just surrender by assassination. That move was also mistimed. Another 37 hours and the pressure from our assault would have been eroding their ability to communicate. Secondary psychological fear, doubt, and confusion would have been rising to a peak. You could have ridden that, played and controlled its pace, forcing hives to fall or change sides at the exact moment when it would amplify whatever effect you wanted. What you did was effective, but it was not optimally so by your own criteria. Dorne stared at Alpharius, but the Alpha Legion Primarch did not reply. I know you, brother, continued Dorne. I knew that you were here before I walked through the door. I knew it was you on that throne, not because you made an error in your masquerade. You made no mistake. Yet I still knew it was you. Think on that, brother. It is not that I do not understand what you are or what you do. I understand both. We are what we choose to be. So we see Rogal Dorn understands Alpharius, and this is something that comes into play later, when he crushes his brother in close combat and utterly destroys him. Dorne is not confused by, nor is he distracted by, Alpharius. He knows what the Hydra is going to do as much as he knows himself and what he is going to do. The main advantage Alpharius typically wields over others is not an advantage he has over Dorne. But Dorne doesn't know about the existence of Omegon. So, the Alpha Legion is effectively still under the control of a Primarch. Something that would come as a surprise to Rogal, I'm sure, if he were to learn the truth. In other books, we see Malcador poking at Dorne, as he obviously is aware of the death of Alpharius. But Dorne never told anyone, and his Huskarls are sworn to secrecy, even among the Imperial Fists. And there are a lot of hints throughout the lore that Alpharius' words did get to Dorne a bit, and have him second-guessing, and perhaps even regretting slaying his brother. But how it affects Omegon is insane, a trap he has fallen into that he knows he will never escape from. For all intents and purposes, Omegon is the one who died. As he takes up the mantle of Alpharius and becomes him, I doubt that he ever used the name Omegon again. Omegon woke. He had never slept, had never dreamed or felt the tug of mortal fatigue in all the days of his existence. Yet here he was, waking from black oblivion, the cold deck of the ship beneath him, the darkness of his arming chamber close about him. The pulse of the Beta's engines was a distant rumble on the edge of silence. Coldness poured through his flesh. Moisture beaded his skin. He could taste blood in his mouth, thick and harsh with iron. His hands were numb, his fingers hooked as though grasping something that had vanished. He moved the fingers and then brought them up to his face. Sharp needles of pain prickled beneath his touch. And then a new feeling came. Crushing in its weight, undeniable in its truth, even though he could not tell how it had arrived. He was alone. Words began to form on his tongue, but the door to the chamber was already opening. Arcus stood in the light from the door, his battleplate humming as he stepped within. "Lord Omegon," Arcus said, bowing his head briefly, then stopping as his eyes fell on the Primarch. "Is there something wrong?" No. Is there..." He blinked. Cold spirals of light wormed briefly at the edge of sight. "Alone." "Is there word from Lord Alpharius?" Omegon asked, still looking at his hands. He could sense Arcus's frown without needing to see it. "None," he said. "But there's something else." Omegon looked up, the muscles of his neck cold as they moved. "Warmaster Horus wishes to consult directly with Lord Alpharius." "Do we have any indication of what his concern is?" "No, Lord," said Arcus. "Our sources within the Warmaster's court have become unreliable." Omegon nodded, glancing over his shoulder as though he had heard something in the empty dark. "Prepare the Metatron," he said. "I will speak with my brother." Arcus nodded, his gaze lingering on his Primarch for an instant before he left. Alone. Omegon armored himself, the blind servitors bolting the plates of his armor over his flesh as the numbness in his hands and neck became a smoldering pain. I am alone. The knowledge rose through the coldness of his thoughts, certain and inescapable, though he could not say how he knew that it was fact, not fear. He had never been alone, not truly. Even from the first spark of a thought in his consciousness, he had known that he was one of many, a fragment of a greater whole, a piece of a great destiny. And now, he walked from his armory, the scaled and crested helm of the Primarch of the Alpha Legion under his arm. Arcus was waiting in the sealed chamber where they kept the Metatron. Omegon nodded, and the attendants began to unbolt the mask from the one-time astropath's head. He watched as the famine-thin figure writhed, ghost light and smoke pouring from its mouth to form a shadow in the air above it, a shadow with a face and form. Frost spread across the floor and up his armor. He bowed his head even as the shadow turned to look at him. What had happened? What was happening? What was he now? And he realized that the words he was about to say would trap him for the rest of existence. The jest turned into mocking truth. I am Alpharius, he said. What is your will, my Warmaster? And when Omegon, posing as his brother, met with the Warmaster Horus Lupercal to explain his actions and report on the success or failure of his mission, we see the Primarch of the Alpha Legion showing us all the truth about the 20th. They're dead, gone, ineffective, incapable of being what they were because they are now shattered. Horus considers the 20th Legion lost, as does Omegon. But their conversation, if you can call it that, is beyond insane. Pure intimidation is just rolling off Horus, and Omegon strides right up, whips his balls out, and drops them on the table, totally smashing it. Alpharius walked forwards and stopped a pace from Horus. The only weapon he bore was a sheathed dagger at his waist, the grip fashioned in the shape of two intertwined snakes. Scales covered his armor, glinting iridescent blue, and a helm with a low crest hid his face. He did not remove it. You bring me no warriors, brother. They did not perish at the gates of Terra, and yet they are not here. So what do you come to lay at your Warmaster's feet?" Alpharius did not reply, but simply took a small black and brass cylinder from a recess in his armor. Data sockets gleamed at either side of the rod. Alpharius held it out. Horus looked at him, his focus bleeding out into the air around him. Argonis winced at the pressure in his skull. Horus gestured, and Argonis stepped forwards to take the data cylinder. Alpharius held up his free hand, and the gesture was somehow enough to freeze Argonis in mid-stride. Horus and Alpharius remained still, looking at each other, the Master of Serpents seeming small beneath the undiluted focus of the Warmaster. Argonis wondered how anything could remain still under that gaze. Then slowly, without breaking his focus, Horus reached out and took the cylinder. Alpharius nodded. Horus tossed it to Argonis, who slotted it into an isolated cogitator. Cogs clattered, discs of silver spun, and then cones of hololight unfolded in the air. First came the great body of the sun, and then its planets, each blooming to dominate the view before shrinking as their siblings were added. Moons, orbital habitats, drifts of void stations, and fortresses glimmered into view. Data shone in halos around them, flowing with strength specifications, tactical weaknesses, and threat reaction parameters. Argonis recognized the image. It was a strategic view of the solar system, but threaded and woven with information on every detail of its defenses, from communication response times to main troop strengths. It was staggering, a treasure of intelligence from the heart of Rogal Dorn's fortress. Horus did not look at it, as though he had known what Alpharius would bring. "You have my thanks," said Horus. Behind them, the projection of the solar system spun, its secrets unfolding like flowers in sunlight. "You have done as I asked, but come alone. Where's your legion?" Alpharius did not move for a long moment. Reflections of the display flowed across the green lenses of his helm. Then he drew the knife from his waist. The motion was simple, not a grand flourishing or threat-filled flash, but still the Justarin twitched. Horus did not move. Alpharius held the dagger up. It was long and double-edged. Twin serpents etched on the blade to match the grip, one coiling towards the hilt, one towards the tip. Alpharius held it still for a second, then reached up with his other hand. He gripped the blade. Rager edges bit into ceramite. Argonis realized what he was going to do an instant before the blade shattered in Alpharius' grasp. He opened his hand. The slivers of metal fell between the fingers like sharp petals of a crushed rose. Then he dropped the dagger's hilt at Horus's feet, turned, and walked towards the door. The Justarin moved to stop him, but Horus gave a small shake of his head. "No," he said. "Let him go." A total beast! Nobody handled the Warmaster like the twins. This is an absolute baller move by Omegon Alpharius. Just as badass as when Alpharius threatened to slay Abaddon and Erebus right in front of Horus. And one reason why I love the twins so much. Why the Hydra is not to be messed with. They can wield power as easily as their brother Primarchs wield power weapons. So we ultimately can conclude from Praetorian of Dorne and the events surrounding the death of the Primarch of the 20th Legion and the rise of his twin, that it was in fact the Legion that died. They still had an acting Primarch, but that whole thing with the dagger was not so subtle of a metaphor, which explains the Alpha Legion and its structure in the current timeline of Warhammer 40k. They are indeed a shattered whole. Too bad Dorne slew a loyal brother, only doing his job of infiltration. Truly tragic and absolutely grimdark indeed. It's funny, on my video about how the Dropsite Massacre book confirmed the Alpha Legion were loyal, so many people responding with so many whataboutisms. How can they be loyal? What about when they... fill in the blank. All I can say, other than if you want to make an omelet you need to break a few eggs, is Professor Snape literally killed Dumbledore to maintain cover and ultimately is seen as a hero for his infiltration of Voldemort's inner circle. Why can't this simple logic be applied to the Alpha Legion? Anyway, there's really only one reason, and one reason alone, and that's people get exceptionally attached to their preconceived notions. Remember, kids, the Alpha Legion may be all over the place now, as far as loyalty is concerned, but during the Heresy era, they were commanded by their Primarchs, and loyal to a fault to them, no matter what they were asked to do. With Alpharius gone and Omegon taking the name, effectively becoming Alpharius, we have a loyalist Primarch leading what remains of a crumbling legion that has crossed the Rubicon and become something they can never unbecome. Traitorous heretics that are to be hunted down and destroyed lest their taint spread throughout the Imperium. The Legion may be a bunch of shattered pieces, like the dagger, but it will never be wielded as a single blade again, was what I took from Omegon's display when he dropped the hilt of the dagger at the feet of Horus. But it seems that Solomon Akura wasn't aware of this, and he may just be the force that can reforge that blade and wield it with a single purpose once again. After all, he did secure both the blade and the haft of the Pale Spear, reuniting the Primarch's weapon with the Legion. It may just be time for the Hydra to rise once again.